Welcome to the Every Learner Everywhere Putting Equity into Practice webinar series for 2024. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Norma Hollebeck, and I'm the Senior Manager for Network Programs and Services with Every Learner Everywhere. Before we introduce our network partner and guests for today, I'd like to take out just a few minutes to tell you about Every Learner Everywhere and the mission of our network. Every Learner Everywhere is a collaboration of higher education organizations with the expertise in evaluating, implementing, scaling, and measuring the efficacy of digital learning and its integration into pedagogical practice. Every Learner Everywhere is sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and here at Every Learner, we work with colleges and universities to build capacity among faculty and instructional support staff to improve student outcomes with digital learning. Our mission is to help institutions use new technology to innovate teaching and learning with the ultimate goal of increasing student success, especially for first-generation college students, poverty-impacted students, and racially minoritized students. A quick housekeeping note. Throughout the presentation, we welcome your questions in the Q&A section. If participants raise their hand, however, we will be unable to unmute you. We will be monitoring the Q&A section as well as the chat throughout the presentation. And now I will hand over the session to Ray Keith, Associate Director for Teaching and Learning at Achieving the Dream.
Thank you, Norma, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our second part of our webinar series, Putting Equity into Practice. And so today our focus will be social justice education and taking a look at our social justice education, equity-minded digital teaching guide. And so again, thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Dr. Michelle Hampton, and I am a professor at Cuyahoga Community College. I teach in the business administration area.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Kinnison, Associate Director of Program Development with Achieving the Dream.
Oh, I forgot to mention I'm an Achieving the Dream consultant.
And we just want to thank Every Learner Everywhere and thank Norma for her work behind the scenes. And again, being a network partner, working with Achieving the Dream, we are a national nonprofit organization that has a network of over 300 colleges, community colleges in our network, and we serve colleges of over 45 states in the United States. And so again, thank you for your partnership and the opportunity to participate in this webinar series.
So today we have two panelists. Our first panelist that I'm going to introduce is Dr. Mary Robinson, who has over 20 years of experience as an educator. She's a professor at Montgomery College, where she teaches integrated English, writing, and reading, and English 103 technical writing in multiple modalities. Mary has chaired or co-chaired the Maryland Literacy Review work groups, received and completed teaching fellowships with the United Nations Sustainable Goal, abbreviated as UNSDG, and we're going to hear a little bit about her work with that later on, the Maryland Open Source Teaching, and the OER 2022-2023 Fellowship. She was also the Montgomery College 2021 Faculty of the Year. Our next panelist is Day Romero. Day is an assistant professor in the Communications Studies Department at New Mexico State University, where their area of interest in communication studies is identity intersectionality and how humans communicate through and because of their identities and intersectionalities. In their role as Basic Course Director for COM 1115G, they strive to educate through a critical lens to promote curiosity, unlearning, and empathy. They hope to promote the use of intersectional communication and an understanding of how important diverse voices, identities, and experience are. I'd like to thank Mary and Day for joining us today. Sarah will lead us next in the land and labor acknowledgement.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Ray and Norma and everyone for being here. So the land acknowledgement. The city of Boulder, where the Every Learner Everywhere main offices are located, is on the ancestral homelands and unceded territory of Indigenous peoples who have traversed, lived in, and stewarded lands in the Boulder Valley for over 13,000 years, who live, work, lead, and prosper there today. Those Indigenous nations include the Apache, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Comanche, Pawnee, Shoshone, Sioux, and Ute. We honor and respect people of these nations and their ancestors. We also recognize that Indigenous knowledge, oral histories, and languages handed down through generations have shaped profound cultural connections with Boulder area lands and ecosystems, connections that are sustained and celebrated to this day. Those now living and working on these ancestral lands have a responsibility to acknowledge and address the past. The city refutes past justifications for the colonization of Indigenous lands and acknowledges a legacy of oppression that has caused intergenerational trauma to Indigenous peoples and families. We must not only acknowledge our past, but work to build a more just future. We are committed to taking action beyond these words. We pledge to use this land acknowledgement to help inspire education and reflection and initiate meaningful actions to help support Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations. The city also has a number of ongoing efforts and partnerships with tribal representatives to initiate meaningful action for our community. And the labor acknowledgement. We must acknowledge that much of what we know of this country today, including its culture, economic growth, and development throughout history and across time, has been made possible by the labor of enslaved Africans and their ascendants who suffered the horror of the transatlantic trafficking of their people, chattel slavery, and Jim Crow. We are indebted to their labor and their sacrifice, and we must acknowledge the tremors of that violence throughout the generations and the resulting impact that can still be felt and witnessed today. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So our outcomes for today are to explore transformative social justice practices that lend to creating liberating learning experiences for BILPOC students. We'll be reviewing two key strategies, anti-racist and abolitionist teaching to advance social justice and education. And then we'll have our panelists share faculty exemplars as it relates to instructional practices that authentically validate students' cultures and values and implement social justice teaching and learning in their courses. And now I'll hand it over to Michelle.
So today we're going to delve into the Social Justice Education Guide, and the sections of the guide include pedagogical definitions. We'll talk about the founding scholars in the area of social justice education. We'll look at the framework, the instructional strategies, the benefits, digital tools, how to put it into practice, and also discuss some resources that are included in the guide, pop-outs and links that will help you as you work through incorporating these concepts into your courses.
Thank you, Michelle. Next slide, Norma. Thank you. Social justice education is...
Sarah, can you go back to the definition of social justice education slide? Thanks, Norma.
Yes, okay, I will talk about the definition of social justice education. Social justice education is an emerging, equity-minded pedagogy that intentionally addresses injustices in the educational system and centers the identities, voices, and experiences of students who have been historically marginalized. Through liberating course content, materials, curriculum, assessments, and course environments that lead to equitable experiences and outcomes. Next slide. Social justice education requires faculty to implement foundational concepts and practices, such as developing the ability to recognize and dismantle inequities while advancing freedom and social justice in educational spaces, being aware of who students are, where they're from, and the assets they bring, building skills that acknowledge and confront biases, and creating an environment where students can question content and ideologies and dominant norms in a safer space. The next slide shows the founding scholars. And in all of the guides, including the social justice guide, we go through a similar pattern. So following the definition, we discuss the founding scholars. And also I wanted to let you know that these are images directly from the guide, and we will share the link to the guide with you in this presentation. So the guide features scholars like Dr. Ibrahim Kendi, well known for his text, How to Be an Anti-Racist, who describes anti-racist teaching as an approach to learning that acknowledges, addresses, and disrupts racism within educational environments, as well as featuring Dr. Bettina Love, known for texts such as We Want to Do More Than Survive, who emphasizes that the ultimate goal of abolitionist teaching is freedom, freedom to create your reality, where uplifting humanity is at the center of all decisions, equal rights, liberties, and citizenship for Black children, their families, and their communities. Next slide, please.
The CARE framework from the former Center for Anti-Racist Education provides educators with practical steps to begin the journey toward becoming anti-racist practitioners. This framework has 5 principles that it focuses on. The first, affirming the dignity and humanity of all people. Next, embracing historical truths. Developing a critical consciousness that centers how course content should intentionally address power, positionality, and injustice while engaging in conversations that foster students' critical consciousness, recognizing race and confronting racism, and lastly, creating just systems where faculty address bias, racism, privilege, and oppression that impact the learning experiences of BILPOC students through creation of equitable learning environments. The instructional strategies offered to intentionally implement social justice education that are included in this guide are anti-racist teaching and abolitionist teaching. Bettina Love coined the term abolitionist teaching and defines it as a way of being that is grounded in understanding, affirming, and embracing the beauty, joy, and resilience of BILPOC students. When we look at the first strategy, which is anti-racist teaching, it basically decenters dominant ideologies while including voices and perspectives that have not historically been included or have historically been silenced. So it's my position that technology and education should be used as an enabler for learning and engagement. Some common digital tools in this space include digital storytelling tools, LMS discussion forums, and wiki tools for collaborative assignments and peer feedback. These tools allow students to explore and express their voices and stories that can be used to enrich themselves, each other, and the curriculum.
Thanks, Michelle. And so we mentioned earlier that we do have pop-out resources within the guide. And so we really wanted this guide to be interactive, to be a living document that you could use. And so we do have videos, research links that will take you away from the guide, but take you to additional resources that can support you as you engage in social justice education. The next piece of the guide is our cause to wonder, pause, and reflect. And we really want to support folks in becoming reflective practitioners. And so what these with these particular cause to wonders, this really gives people an opportunity to interrogate their own teaching practices through prompts, such as this one here, and then thinking about how do I then begin to enhance or change my curriculum to be more socially justice centered. And so here you'll see the question, how do you incorporate the expertise of BILPOC scholars into the content? And for those folks who have been historically excluded or minimized within the course content. And so again, these are really prompts to get folks to start thinking about how can they improve their teaching and learning practices that truly uplift and affirm BILPOC students and their lived experiences. And putting it into practice, we often hear from faculty in professional learning spaces, we get a lot of theory, we don't get these clear examples. And so we were very intentional about making sure that we were helping folks understand how do you put this into practice and how do you do it? And so here you'll see one of our strategies is to center and amplify the marginalized voices and experience of BILPOC students. So as a professor, how do I do that? And so we give you some clear steps and some examples of how you can do that. And one is creating social justice assignments that then allow students to have agency over their own learning and to become change agents through their own voices and their lived experiences. The other one is to ensure that students authentically engage in pedagogy that is culturally responsive, but also socially just, and thinking about how those dominant norms might be impacting students' experiences and outcomes in those courses, and then making sure that those voices that are usually left out of the learning experience are included in that experience. And so we have one other example of one of our strategies, create educational spaces where students have a liberating experience. We really want to create a space where students can thrive rather than just survive that space. And so one would be curating and teaching content that makes real world connections for students and is also transferable to their lives, their communities, and their future goals. And then intentionally dismantling curricula that others and oppresses students with marginalized identities. And so these are some clear steps of how you can move into becoming a social justice educator and being able to put these practices into place and implementing curriculum and teaching practices that truly validate the lived experience of BILPOC students through social justice education. And then who benefits? This is one of the sections in the guide as well. And so we want to make sure folks understand the why. Why are we implementing social justice education in our courses or at our institutions? And so students will benefit from this, instructors benefit, and the institution also benefits. And so we lay out how those different entities will benefit from social justice education. And so one thing that students will do is develop a critical consciousness and awareness of what is just and fair in their educational and social experiences. The other piece is when implemented with fidelity, students gain a greater understanding of power dynamics, develop respect for cultures different than their own, and then they learn how to address inequities in their communities through social justice change. And so again, we want to make sure people understand the why and who benefits when we engage in social justice education. Next slide. And so thank you for engaging with us as we shared kind of what these guides look like, and we really hope that you will take these guides with you. We'll put the link in the chat and be able to start using them in your teaching and learning experiences. And now we're going to move into our panel discussion with our faculty members, Dr. Mary Robinson and Professor Dave Romero. And so they're going to provide some faculty exemplars and how they put some of the strategies from the social justice guide into practice and what the outcomes were for their students. And also they will share digital tools that they use to enhance their teaching and learning as well. So we're going to start with our first question. What informed you to transform your course and teaching practices through an equity-minded and social justice lens? And so what was the catalyst for that change?
For me, the catalyst was low attendance, students not engaging in the assignment, which was for an ENGL 103 technical writing course, which one of the major deliverables was developing a business proposal. And I just kind of noticed that students were really struggling through the research, struggling through completing the assignment. I was invited to simultaneously participate in an interdisciplinary teaching fellowship here at Montgomery College, focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I was paired with a business professor, and through that assignment, we began to recreate that particular one assignment into an innovative business proposal using those themes. As a result of that, student engagement increased, attendance increased for face-to-face, and even looking at my Blackboard analytics, students were more active in that particular module.
Great, thank you, Dr. Robinson.
As for me, I am a product and very proud product of Achieving the Dream and Every Learner Everywhere. In my first semester, I was able to join the community of practice, not only to learn strategies, but also to normalize experiences and really just create a community. In this line of work, you do sometimes feel alone. You're battling these systems of power and very hegemonic ways of presenting your material. So when it came down to it, being a person that doesn't identify within many of the hegemonic identities, it was, also almost like serendipitous that I joined ATD and Every Learner Everywhere when I did, because after I left the community of practice, it's been nothing but growth after, and I just continue to, create or try to create places where as a student, I didn't necessarily feel welcome or safe or anything like that due to my intersectional identities. So I really do just strive to be that educator for folks that identify outside, the power structures of our society.
I've got the next question.
Well, sorry, we're going to move into Dr. Robinson's presentation around this particular strategy. And then
I've got the next question later. How about that?
So the strategy is empowering students to develop the skill sets to become social justice agents that lead to action, transformation, and freedom. And so Dr. Robinson's going to share some assignments that she created and how those students engaged in this particular strategy. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. So again, this is for an English 103 technical writing course, which requires one component of students to develop a business proposal. And this particular assignment was transformed into using an open education resource where students would select one of the 17 UN SDG goals to develop an innovative business proposal. You see here that these are the steps that students would take, and I'll say a little bit more about that in the slides to come. But just in general, first students would brainstorm ideas about one of the goals that they would like to develop their proposal. Using a PowerPoint as well as a voiceover, they would create an audio pitch about the mission, vision, and core values of their innovative business proposal. From there, they would develop a budget and timeline so they could advocate for some fictitious funding, as well as then using digital tools to develop a trifold pamphlet, as well as a PDF PowerPoint file for the proposal to develop the final outcome of the proposal. So just take a quick second to look at the steps here, because I really would like to show you how this assignment became practical. But again, the topics emerge. Students will reflect on their culture and background experiences. Using the LMS Blackboard system, I would develop writing prompts, and students would begin to kind of share some of their background culture experiences. At Montgomery College, students are from 150 countries. And so this particular writing prompt allows students an opportunity to really share their background experiences. Finally, students become creators of the curriculum with the professor. The final documents are used for the next class. And I've also presented with students where they have actually advocated for grant money regarding their final business ideas. Students will walk through the Creative Commons license products so that they can receive their own license for the open education resource. So I kind of really like that as well. Yep. Next slide. What you see here are some student examples. This particular student was really concerned about college students not having dental insurance. And so the idea was to develop a mobile dentistry that will travel from campus to campus, where students would at least receive just some basic dental care.
Robinson, can you share how social justice was implemented or applied to these particular assignments?
Yes, and I have a little bit more of that
Okay,
in the framework as well. Yep. Yep, here we are. So I was just really excited to incorporate the CARE framework into this particular assignment. So you saw in the previous slides, there were several steps that students took to develop the final product. I actually started with the JUST system, which really focused on the creating the idea of what would be their particular proposal ideas. And from this, students begin to see themselves within the particular assignment there. So we would develop, students would select one of the goals, we would brainstorm for them to come up with their idea. By the time we get to the humanity, students are now at the center of the assignment. They're sharing their particular ideas, and students then really begin to think about their own backgrounds, their own biases, think about their local, national, and international communities there, and begin to discover the why. I really like the component of the historical truths, because this is where we dive really now deep into the literature, and we get to kind of research students' own truth, learn more about anti-racism and those particular ideas and those themes that emerge from that really help students hone in on what would be the final product there. Race and racism is where students begin to reflect and even discuss lack thereof of access. And so for an example, one student developed an all-inclusive Wi-Fi cafe, and the images and the signage that the learner used for this really spoke to those who were less marginalized, those students who were from LGBT communities. They felt that the classroom was now a safe place to discuss even some of their own personal backgrounds. And he developed a all-inclusive cafe, which also became an open mic. And so again, now students are able to share their truths, and felt like this particular innovative, inclusive Wi-Fi cafe would provide students, again, a safe place to share their stories. The critical conscious got us to really where we dealt with the power and marginalization, and students begin to advocate again through funding, but through those thematic themes are incorporated from the literature. What does racism look like in their communities? What about their own injustices and even feeling oppressed where they could not develop their own ideas, all through using one of those 7 thematic themes there.
Dr. Robinson, before you move ahead, can you talk a little bit about how long did it take you to apply this CARE framework to your project?
Well, actually, I'm right now in phase 1. So this is let's say the spring semester. So we start around about, I started the end of February, and the assignment is done in phases. Students actually present their final products by the end of May. So roughly about 2.5 months. Some students find themselves, like for an example, UNSDG goals speaks to gender equality, and then also reducing inequalities there. And so some students find themselves navigating, between the two, which means that we may not get to finish, the entire proposal, because I do want students really to take the time, to work through this. We've also had some pauses because these are sensitive topics. So sometimes I've had to slow it down, really to allow students to really reflect and discuss in depth their social justice themes. So in that case, the deliverable may take on a different type of outcome, and I will allow that to happen.
Right. So I heard a rumor, like in a week, you had figured out how to integrate this care framework into what you were doing.
Yes. Well, the framework, if you look at all of the narratives that go along with the framework, I was able to take a look at the phases of the assignments and go back to look at the work that the students have produced through Blackboard and through their literature reviews. And I tell you, the part about the historical truths is one of the most powerful sections of the students' proposals, because they develop those themes around oppression, around prejudices, and around biases, and are doing even the data analytical work to kind of match that within the work that they're doing.
Thank you. Here's my second question. Here we go. Okay. Which digital tools have you utilized to enhance learning and/or student engagement?
One of the highlights of this assignment is that students have to develop an audio pitch. And so we were using PowerPoint as well as VoiceOver. And within the audio pitch, it's 3 minutes. What is the mission? What is the vision? And what are the core values? Again, when we talk about social justice, we really begin to see those themes in the core values emerge of how students are reversing the narrative of racism, of injustices, and you begin to see that in their core values of the innovative business proposal. We also use the accessibility. We early on in some of the proposals, you'll see we didn't really use the accessibility tools. So because we use a lot of images now, and students are using Canva and AI to generate their images, we're using the accessibility tool. Blackboard LMS is the chosen LMS here at Montgomery College, so that really was the foundational means for how we also communicated.
Thank you. Professor Romero, you want to take a stab at this one?
Yes. So I am a basic course director for a general education course with 600 students enrolled. So it is a little bit different than, your normal 30-person to 20-person class. That being said, I do utilize Mentimeter. That's something that I've found and really found useful and engaging with students when it comes down to midterm semester evaluations. They very much say that they like the QR codes of Mentimeter, being able to have their opinions and voices heard. It normalizes experiences. It takes folks outside of their own perspectives and realize, like, hey, not everybody communicates the way that I do, or not everybody thinks the way I do. It also helps create community within such a large course, right? It's not just one student being called out. It's many of them having their voices heard, and hopefully, find commonalities within the class.
So in this next section, we're going to have Professor Romero talk about, again, one of our strategies around social justice and anti-racist teaching and learning. And so one way is to decolonize course content and curriculum. And so Thank you, Dr. Romero, or Professor Romero, for sharing your exemplars with us as well and how students engage with your assignment and activities.
Yes. Thank you so much for allowing me to present. I first need to shout out my team. Like I said, I am the basic course instructor for Common 1115G, which is the Introduction to Communication course here at NMSU. And I also teach 600 students, but I wouldn't be anything or be able to do anything without my team. I do have a team of 11 to 12 GTAs teaching the labs where they apply many of the ideas and content to, public speaking assignments or anything like that. So I would not be able to do anything without them. So I wanted to give them a little shout out. But if we go to our next slide, we'll be able to see how I am able to implement the CARE framework into the course. Like I said, it is a very large course. So me, approaching it through a social justice lens, I do need to understand that many different students are at many different places in their lives. Some of them have never talked about identity. Some of them have never heard intersectionality, or think they're no-no words, right? So I really try to begin with centering their own identities and their own humanity, right? I feel like if they understand how communication relates to their own identities and how they potentially do not fit, within the hegemonic ways that they think that they do, then they would be able to gain empathy and learn, how different people are and how diverse people and experiences are, to hopefully, have them all realize that they're all just humans trying to, move forward in the world. I do try to value the student epistemology. Every single student has a different way of learning and a different knowledge base, right? They come in with their own examples and their own ways of being able to communicate and implement the content within those experiences. So I absolutely, especially through Mentimeter, invite them to share their experiences, to share their opinions, to share their expectations, right? Sometimes, a lot of times they teach me, right? I'm a millennial and we're starting to teach, a different generation. So there's a lot of things where I'm just like, dang, like I didn't even know that was an actual thing, especially when it comes down to communication. So I know that me, myself, keeping my students as human as opposed to just like do this, do that type of student robots. It is very important within my approach. Embracing historical truths is also a big one, kind of like Dr. Robinson said. When it comes down to it, I do try to provide an accurate historical, truth to everything that I do. I do try to decolonize in, strategic ways, being able to explicitly call out what has been part of the status quo, right? Either within academia, within our field. I come from communication studies. Our field is, predominantly white, predominantly male, predominantly cis, and predominantly, heterosexual. So when it comes down to engaging with the material, I need to be able to call that out to challenge the way that students think about this, right? Even within my own experiences as a student, I'm like, dang, I can't fit into this content because I'm not white, because I'm not straight, right? So being able to call out those historical truths is very important as far as, challenging their like hegemonic ways of communicating, right? Even just public speaking, not everybody likes to make eye contact throughout the world, right? That's very, Western American focused. So again, embracing historical truths is really important. And it helps students, challenge the norms and stereotypes of communication. I do try to develop critical consciousness by introducing them to power dynamics within communication, detailing how every single one of your conversations has a power dynamic attached to it. They are challenged to reflect on their positionality as communicators within specific, conversations themselves. They have discussions, where they're able to reflect on that information, and kind of like how Ray said, reflection is one of the core things that we got to do through a social justice lens. Recognizing race and confronting racism, acknowledging the systems of power, right? Understanding that the way that we communicate is due to hierarchies, is due to the patriarchy, is due to capitalism. So all these different types of power systems that we have embedded within, our society do impact how we communicate as humans. So being able to, recognize, the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, any of the isms is very important within my approach. Also, NMSU is an MSI. It's a minority serving institution and a Hispanic serving institution. So again, to represent those communities is something that's very, very, very important as far as, my social justice lens. And lastly, to create, just systems, I need to confront my own biases and stereotypes, as well as our students, right? Understanding how cultural bias comes up in their communication, right? Encouraging them to reflect on how, bias can potentially show up in their interpersonal and their cultural and their organizational communication. Sometimes I use myself, right, as an example. I am a queer, Mexican, very, I have gauges tattooed. I am completely outside of the status quo of what they're used to in academia. So what biases do they have towards me being their professor right off the bat, right? And I understand I put myself in the line of fire, and it is a good way to kind of, hopefully see that power dynamic as well as question it. But yeah, so lastly, I really strive to create an environment of curiosity and provide, transformative spaces for my students, create a culture of affirmation for my GTAs and my students, with everything going on in the world, current events, next Benedict, everything that's going on in Gaza. Like, it's just, these are human beings. We're teaching and working with human beings who grieve, who have anger, who have sadness, and being able to provide a space for them to be their authentic selves, to question these ways of thinking, to question and reflect on their own complex identities, their intersectional identities. It is very important to hopefully potentially create more empathy within their own experiences, right? Have empathy for yourself and try to, be kind to yourself, as well as, other folks who may be, outside your experience. So thank you so much. That's the CARE framework that I try to implement. But the next slide, I do have an example of a simple, way to introduce identities and have them reflect on their own identities. So I do, introduce social identities, because I feel like that's something that everybody can very much relate to. We all have social identities and communities. But in the next slide, they do reflect on what part of their identity that they may not have reflected on before, right? So like, what makes you feel discriminated? Which part of your identity makes you feel discriminated? Which part provides you the most privilege, right? We all have privilege in some way, shape, or form. So I do try to kind of introduce them to that way of thinking and that way of reflecting, to hopefully, have them understand at least their own experiences through that. And I think that Oh, yes. So how does this activity help students? One, it understands their own identity and how they communicate. It normalizes experiences and ways of communicating throughout the student population. Again, it builds community. Hopefully it gains empathy through marginalized experiences or diverse experiences. And hopefully it gains that they are able to gain awareness through their own, identities and intersecting identities. Thank you so much.
Question, Professor Romero, if we could go back to the previous slide. How did students, I guess, how did they engage with this identity activity? Again, depending on who's in the classroom space, and certainly, did you do this with your course that you had 600 students in, or was this a different course?
So this is a activity that we do in our labs. However, I do present this as an identity workshop activity. And usually the folks that honestly have the hardest time are the people within the status quo of academia. They're the ones that, don't necessarily have to worry about their experiences or anything like that, because it's not necessarily impacting them the way that, marginalized and diverse students. So it really is a great eye opener for students that, are within, oh my gosh, on the top of the hierarchy when it comes down to academia. So those are the students that have a little bit of a harder time, and it does give them the opportunity to hear experiences outside their own.
Right, so let's move to our next question. How did students' engagement with social justice education improve outcomes and their experience in the course?
So I'll discuss that one of the things that with every assignment you have to also change the grading scheme in order to kind of determine what that outcome is going to be. So with the CARE framework, I've actually placed that into a rubric, and the rubric becomes a thematic rubric where students, well, you have the categories of the CARE framework, but across we want to know, the why. And this does then create an equitable educational experience for the students versus just really grading them on a score of a 1, 2, 3, and 4. I have found that because students are now self-grading themselves based on these categories here, where we've kind of done a preliminary rubric on our phase 1 of the proposal, that students begin to see themselves again within the curriculum and are able to kind of, as it says here, champion their own identities and share their own perspectives. A previous assignment, one group of students created a mobile medical center in Africa. They recognized the tribe of the content that was in there, and then they began to create an educational system. So students are also finding their peers within this work and their own tribes, and seeing that it's okay, to say that we may be from a third world country, but possibilities are, endless.
I agree, Dr. Robinson. But overall, I think when it comes down to it, I've received comments of, students feel seen, students feel heard for the first time in their whole academic career. And I have received comments where students are like, I've wanted to be in leadership positions, and now I understand, experiences outside of my own when it comes down to being able to lead, to being able to guide folk that potentially don't identify as them or as they do. But yeah, so again, it's case by case basis, but absolutely when it comes down to empathy, that's something that I feel that they gain from these experiences.
So there's a question in the chat. I will take the lead on asking that to the panelists. Diane wanted to know, is this your first assignment? That's for either Dr. Robinson or Professor Romero.
Yes, so we do try to start off, introducing them to a intersectional model of communication, and that, links them with the identity activity. So yes, it would be our first class activity.
Okay.
For us, it's not the first activity, but I do a group project prior to this lesson, whether it's face-to-face or online, to kind of get the students really, talking and familiarized with their peers. This actually is the last assignment, and I really wish that I could just expand it for the entire semester. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge one of our co-authors has been on the workshop, Dr. Rhonda Garth McCullough. So thank you for joining. And also thank you so much to the panelists for bringing the social justice work to life through your real life course examples. We worked on bringing it to life through the writing and the links, and we want people to use it as an interactive guide and engage with it. But and seeing it and hearing about it, how it was actually put into practice in your courses is so helpful for all of us. So I just want to thank you again to our outstanding panelists. And then there's another question in the chat. I'm going to paste it here. When engaging in social identity discussion with your students, how do you navigate students who use their marginalized identities I'm sorry, to avoid talking about and acknowledging race? Let's see.
I can see it. For me,
Okay.
this is one of the reasons, that's one of the reasons why I changed to use this particular type of assignment, because students did not or were not talking and feared even addressing race and their own injustices. But by using this thematic framework, I found that students found their voice. And not only that, they found a safe place within the classroom, to share their voice and build their confidence to say, hey, I want this to be an open education resource. And so now that information is available, to others, and I want to participate in panels. So this is one of the reasons why I changed to use this thematic framework.
This one's a good one, y'all. And I say this because we are all afraid to talk about our privileges. We're all afraid to own our power, right? Like, and I explicitly say, because I do talk about power and I do talk about privilege in my lecture, I explicitly say how I have worked very hard as a first generation student to gain a bachelor's, to gain a master's, as a queer Mexican, non-traditional student, right? And I need to acknowledge, yes, even though I have gone through these, battles throughout my educational career, I've been silenced, I've been muted, and I am now in a power or in a position of power, right? And I acknowledge that. So even though, yes, I do have power and I do have privilege, that doesn't mean that I didn't work my butt off to get here and earn those power and those privileges. So I think that's one of the main things. I try to own my own, right? And be the example that students potentially need to be like, okay, yes, I am queer, I am, potentially disabled or anything like that. And I understand that I am white. And that in itself, within, the systems in place, gives me power. In my race category, I am at the top of the hierarchy. And that's where the beauty of intersectionality comes in, right? We're not trying to, diminish your experiences with your other identities. However, we do need to acknowledge that we do have power and privilege in some areas while being marginalized and oppressed in others.
Thank you.
Great question, y'all. Great question.
Thank you for your responses.
And
Marion, go ahead, Ray.
I would say also, you have to be intentional in creating spaces where students are feeling safer, or students feel that they can share their lived experiences. but also making sure that we're not creating spaces where students feel like they have to now be the voice for their community or for the groups, a racialized group that they are a part of, and also making sure that they're not feeling that it's a tokenizing experience. So it really has to be authentic. It has to be liberating. The space has to be a place where students truly feel that they belong, and that they're also sharing positionality and power with the instructors. Other questions? We have about 5 minutes left. Are there final thoughts that you want to share, Dr. Robinson or Professor Romero?
Just would like to, encourage other, faculty to consider social justice frameworks as part of the instructional, development, that it kind of takes us away from the traditional podium, takes us away from the traditional grading, and really allows students to engage in the work. While this course is taught at a community college, we have students from all over four-year universities that are enrolling in the course and wanting to know, are we going to be able to create, that UNSDG, proposal there? So just that encouragement there, and hope that you would consider incorporating the CARE framework into your work as well.
I do appreciate that you brought up, Day, that you brought up assessments. And so how can our assessments be created through a social justice lens?
Was that a follow-up or additional question?
That was just a thought.
Yes,
and
yes.
maybe, yeah, because I think we need to think about our assessments and how do our traditional assessments continue to create barriers and marginalize our students based on those ideologies.
I think, Ray, to follow up on your point, that's a place where digital tools can really shine. It doesn't always have to be, pencil to paper and the traditional exam questions and things like that. Immersing students in a storytelling assignment would really serve to give them an opportunity to share their stories and really give them a chance to own their voice.
All right, Professor Romero, I'm making you a doctor. It's happening, right? Did you have a final thought?
I just I know within this journey, the community of practice really helped me with the maybe like the pushback or the resistance from students within, the social justice framework that I put forth. So that being said, it isn't necessarily a walk in the park, y'all. We do need to kind of restructure education as a whole, right? This is against what, we know in academia at the moment. And I hope to create it as a norm, right? And it is, a little bit difficult when you start getting that resistance. You feel like you're not doing a good job. You feel like something's wrong, but, there's folks out here that are doing the work. And I hope to continue communicating with y'all. I put my email in the chat. But yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for engaging in this critically important topic of social justice education. And we hope you will join us in our next session, Putting Equity into Practice, Open Pedagogy. And the date for that is Thursday, March 28th, and it will be from 2 to 3 Eastern. So hope to see you there.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, all of our panelists and facilitators. For our audience, we ask that you take just a few minutes out to complete our survey for today's presentation using the link that we're posting in the chat for you. And if you've got something else going on immediately after, don't worry. We'll send you the link to the survey in a follow-through email in the next couple of days. So as we wrap things up, thank you very much for all your all's time and effort. Thanks to our audience for being here. We encourage you to visit the Every Learner Everywhere website and our resources page, where you can find these resource guides as well as many other resources from our partners, including ATD. And all of our resources are free to read online or even to download. Thank you again, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day.